Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is Vivian Mabuni. She's a national speaker and writer with 30 years of ministry experience on the staff with Crew, which is college students. She's also the author of Warrior in Pink, which details her struggle with breast cancer. This morning, Vivian joins us to talk about an incredible book and one that will really make us all think about what we're saying and how we are receiving from God. The book is entitled Open Hands, Willing Heart. Discover the joy of saying yes to God. Vivian, good morning and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Vivian, you have been in ministry for many, many years, and you've written one book that talks about your own life and your own challenges and your faith. Why was this book important to write?
Well, I think the first one, again, chronicled a journey of cancer. And this one felt like a blank canvas where I could just really put into words a life message. And in 30 years of ministry with college students primarily and young adults, I realized that what I keep circling back to is this idea that the Christian life is lived out with purpose and significance as we open our hands and have a posture of willingness. So it's almost like the title alone, I feel like, is a recalibration for my own soul as to my condition of my heart and my posture before God. So in my own life, I think over and over, I see a point in time decision that believers come to as far as being willing to live yielded to God, surrendered to His will. But then I think it's an ongoing decision that we come to these crossroads and we again need to bring before God open hands and a willing heart. And open hands to me is to receive from Him as well as allow Him to take things from our hands too. And I think some beautiful opportunities arise out of this posture.
Absolutely. And you start the book sharing not only scripture of Esther's story, but also a woman by the name of Florence, and you share her story and her willingness. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Oh, yes. I had the privilege, and actually in a few weeks we'll be able to return to Rwanda to meet up again with Florence. But she and her husband founded African New Life Ministry, which is a wonderful organization founded by Rwandans for Rwanda post-genocide in 1994. So following the genocide that happened in the early 90s, there were 400,000 orphans left, and just brutal attempts to exterminate an entire people group. So I think the contrast of seeing Florence's life and hearing her story was incredibly inspiring because she, just like me, was the first Christian in her family. And for her, as the oldest daughter, she was tasked to, find food and water for the cows and walked barefoot long distances in Uganda at the time. And she prayed a surrender prayer. She said, God, if you're really real, would you give me education? And if you give me education, I will tell people how great you are for the rest of my life. And here was 15-year-old Florence saying this prayer in the middle of Western Uganda. And little did she know at that time what God would do as she continued to do so. So I'm able to share her story of just her willingness to even let go of financial resources in the midst of need and to see out of that posture again how God could grow something really beautiful.
And I think the big piece of your story and Florence's story is something that many of us would take for granted. And you said you were the first Christians in your family.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people really don't understand the essence and the importance of being a Christian in a place where there is no God.
It's true. And I think there's it's interesting because my kids then, my husband was also the first Christian in his family. And, so we kind of stumble into Christian marriage and Christian parenting, not really having the benefit of generations to look to. But the advantage, I think, is in some ways it was a fresh faith for us. We were just seeking God in the ways we knew to do, drawing from people who had had generations of believers. So there's kind of the benefit of both. I think on one hand, my friends who have grown up with a rich legacy of believers in their heritage, it's really amazing to see the rootedness that comes. And yet each of them have points in time in their own faith journeys where they need to come to a place of surrender, where they are unable just to ride on the coattails of the faith of their forefathers and foremothers, where they have to choose before the Lord what they're going to do. And now to see, for us, my husband's side of the family, the entire family knows the Lord now. And to see my nephews and nieces choosing to walk with God has been amazing.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you write about is Esther's journey. And I think for many people at this season in their lives, I know that I'm encountering a lot of people that we're all, especially women and probably men too, but we're all saying, we're seeking all of these things, but it's very hard to surrender so that God can work in our lives. And so really a lot of the book is about being able to surrender, but having the faith to surrender.
Yes. So I really kind of start the book off with, not only identifying the posture of the heart, because I believe that most believers do want to live yielded to God. But that's where, again, the lead foot in the book even is really focusing on the character of God. And as we have an accurate view of who God is, that actually helps us to trust him and to release control. And then I kind of go into, what are some of the areas in our lives that do keep us from living open-handed? So whether it's apathy or entitlement, or I can even look at the what gets in the way is self-reliance or busyness, bitterness. Those are the things that block
Right.
God's Spirit from being able to really move and work in us and through us.
Absolutely. We're going to take a break here, but when we come back, let's talk about some of those things that block us, things that we never even really think about. And another one of the things that you write about is complacency. So there are a lot of things that are blocking us from that big thing, that thing that we know that was meant to happen. And we're wondering, okay, God, why hadn't it happened? Stay on point, everybody. We're going to take a break here, but when we come back, we're going to take a deeper dive into open hands, willing heart. Stay on point. We're back right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is Vivian Mabuni. Her book is entitled Open Hands, Willing Heart, Discover the Joy of Saying Yes to God. Before we went to break, Vivian, we were talking about the things that block us. Talk about how you discovered those blockers, and more importantly, how do we get past them?
Oh, it's an excellent question. I think, my book is primarily written to North American Christians. I think a lot of believers around the world don't necessarily struggle with the same things that we do in our North American Christianity. So in other words, for example, I think oftentimes we approach our relationship with God with a very individualistic, almost narcissistic approach to the scriptures. In other words, we read it with, what does this Bible verse speak to me about my life and
Right.
what I want?
Right.
And we kind of pray with directives like, God, you need to do this now. And we are so disappointed when he says no. And I think that we can tend to have an entitled mentality that, because we are children of the King, we should have the fast pass, that takes us to the front of the line. And so the things that annoy us, I think sometimes are found in a place that starts off with the sense of entitlement, where we deserve the favor of God, rather than realizing that we have been gifted with God's favor, and that these opportunities and even approaching the scriptures is something we get to do, not something that we have to do. So there's a sense that We have a vending machine approach to prayer and to God. Like, I'm putting in my time, I'm, serving in the church, I'm giving my tithes and offerings. And so it out should come this
Right. The thing
outcome.
that I want.
The thing, yes. And so we can kind of become kind of manipulative, honestly, with God. And so whether it's entitlement or self-reliance, I think we are very prone, our flesh is prone to want to do it ourselves. I think in that sense, when you think about the prodigal son story, a lot of Christians will probably relate more to the older son, where, we
I
have
did everything
opportunity to have,
right. I did everything
right, we
right.
did everything right. And where's my party?
Hmm.
Where we completely miss that the Father is the blessing, that relationship with Him is the blessing, that even with the vine and the branches, we tend to look at fruitfulness, whether that's ministry or, our lives being bountiful, abundance as the blessing, when in fact, Jesus, He's the blessing, and that connection with Him is the blessing. So for me in my own life, I realize that on the regular, I need to recalibrate. And it's almost like, floating in the ocean. And it's like I look up and it's not like the beach towel and the little umbrella's moved. It's me in the current of society, in the current of life, where I need to continue to reassess what's really the most important thing.
So you think that in reading the scriptures, because as you say that, I think that there are so many people, including myself, that would say, I'm guilty. I look at scripture as it is applicable to my life and my family's life and the things that I believe that God is speaking to me. So how should we have a broader view, a more
That's such
world
a good,
view?
yes. Well, and I think that um, what is so wonderful is God is so intimate, and He knows how many hairs are on our head. He cares deeply. He knows the words on our lips before we even speak them. So this is the heart of our God. I think for me, learning to read the scriptures not with what does this speak to me about my life, more importantly is what I'm reading teach me about who God is, His heart, His character, what He loves, what He hates. Um, what are the things that I learn about by my reading of that inform me again of who God is? So I can look out and see a beautiful scenic, sunset, and I can have my heart soar, but I don't really understand the parts of God that are beyond His creative beauty. And so as I'm reading the scriptures and I see how Jesus interacts with the marginalized, how he responds to power, how he responds to the outcast, his compassion, I learn about who God is. And so even as I'm reading the Old Testament, I notice that, he never delivers the Israelites the same way in any two battles. Each time he is mixing it up, where sometimes he completely wipes out the enemy before they even arrive, and sometimes it's hand-to-hand battle. And I
Right.
think Jesus heals differently every time because he wants our dependence to be on him and not on a formula. And I
Oh,
think
that's
we just
so
want to
good.
plug in. We
That's
just
so
want to
good.
plug in. So,
Dependence on him and not a formula, not how
yes.
he's going to do it. And I think so many of us get caught up in how is it going to happen?
That's
When
right.
is it going to happen? And it just doesn't work like that, and that's what faith is, isn't it,
Yeah.
Vivian?
Yes. And I think that that's again that posture of open hands, willing heart. The second or the third part of the book really is like what that looks like, because most people do not live their plan A. So what does it look like to live plan B? And what does it look like to serve without seeing? And what does it look like to build bridges instead of walls? And so I just kind of like living it out in real time. We want the instantaneous happy ending moment. And I think God, in His grace, actually provides that far beyond what we even realize. Those times when I actually step back from my circumstances, when I'm feeling like my brain is exploding and my hair is on fire, and if I really just step back for a moment, there's so much to be grateful for the things that I didn't even pray for, that the Lord has in His goodness provided, that I have a car that works. And, I talk about there's nothing to eat, but you know what? I actually do have cupboards full of food, that, oh, there's nothing to wear. No, I actually have so many options and opportunities. God has been so good to me. And I think that that's another place too for me where I, on the regular, need to step back from my circumstances to be able to have Him reset my heart for me to then engage in
And
the
for me,
challenges.
this book, Vivian, is a reset. If you're really in that place and you're trying to figure out why the things that you've prayed for and you've believed for haven't happened, to me, this is a reset to say maybe we need to have open hands and a surrendered heart. And maybe we haven't done that because of those strongholds that sometimes, not sometimes, but almost all the time hold us back. But here's the sneaky thing. Most of us don't know necessarily what that is. Let's take a break here, but when we come back, I want to explore that. And I also want to talk about what you say to young people to bring their heart to God, especially in this world of instantaneousness. Stay on point. We're back with more after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning, Vivian Mabuni. Her book, Open Hands, Willing Heart. It is such a book that makes you think, Vivian, about where you are on this spiritual journey with God. And before we went to break, we were just talking about those things that really hold us back. And a lot of us don't even have a clue about those little things that can have a stronghold. Let's talk about strongholds and how we start to break that off in surrender to what God has for us to do.
Well, I think the first place that we really need to start is honesty. I think for me, it's easy to, especially in this Instagram, social media age, where we have incomplete pictures of life. I think, especially, and we were kind of talking about even with the youth, before break, there's a real disadvantage when, we can run into a supermarket, grab our vegetables, grab some meat, and not have any idea of the time that it took to grow the food or to, harvest, and some of the natural rhythms that come with life in a simpler time. And in that sense, I think, we mistaken these snapshot moments with reality. So, that really beautiful scenic photo that we see with our friend on vacation in the Colorado Rockies does not include the smelly mound of moose poop that was right next to that, that tree stump. So we just don't, the mosquitoes that were swarming, in that tropical sunset, that there are true realities that we aren't privy to in that instantaneous. So we start to set our expectations that life should run smoothly and be without anything that would, get in our way. And it's those very things that I found in my own life that are the places where we need to rely on the Lord and lean into Him, because otherwise we just are on autopilot and we're just kind of going through the motions. So I think it's our trials that really form our soul and produce character in us, and resilience and strength that helps us to actually withstand the harder things that come in life. So my friends who've gone through the harder times, they have a faith that is tried in and true, that they exude a relationship and intimacy with God. And I think that that's really at the end of it all, is that we were formed and created to have relationship with the God of the universe. That that is really where we really find life, truly.
Sure. And so we understand that people who are believers and who believe in God's word. Now, you have spent a lot of your life ministering to young people and this generation that you have so eloquently talked about, that live in an instantaneous world. Fast food, fast cars, fast things happening on social media, everything fast. How now do you minister to that generation to say to them that the mills of God, in the words of Norman Vincent Peale, The mills of God turn slowly. How do you make that connection with, how we know God works and how we know that this generation, your kids and my kids, the world that they live in?
Yeah. I think some of it is awareness and helping them to become more aware. So it's kind of like engaged couples that go to a marriage conference. they just they just don't even know what they don't know, And I guarantee that these young people will at some point grow and realize, okay, that zeal is so good, but it's not going to give the sustaining power to go the long haul. So, on one hand, I can do my part to be able to explain things to them as I know them now, much further down the road. But I understand and I don't take personally the fact that they just can't even really put their mind around it. It's just in their lives, it's a theory. And I see over and over that the Lord does use that youthful zeal to accomplish his great purposes. And even in the scriptures, Daniel was a teenager, Mary, who bore Jesus, was a teenager, Esther was a teenager. There are some outstanding examples of, God using whatever age to further his kingdom and to accomplish his purposes. So my part as one who is actively seeking to disciple and mentor this next generation, raise them up, is that I would do my part to know the shepherd's voice and teach them how to hear his voice so that they can then follow his lead to wherever that the Lord would take them, which may be tomorrow, where they're called out to have to stand up for their faith in ways that they didn't necessarily know, but they're prepared because they have a good understanding. Joshua and Caleb, they got it. The other 10 spies were freaking out because of the circumstances, but these two young men, they got it. And they had to walk around for another 40 years waiting for the whole generation to die off before they could see the promise. And so I think our part as older believers is to help, for us to be trying to live out fresh faith, but then to help them to see that it is absolutely 100% the very most reasonable thing to follow the Lord because of who he is, that he is all loving and he is all powerful and he's all knowing and he's all these things all the time. He is faithful. He's creator. He is not worried. He is completely in control, and he is producing something really unique and beautiful in our lives and in our whole community. And everything that's happening is so much bigger than just us. It's much bigger than our little lives. One of our friends, they are wine enthusiasts in the Central Coast. So they go to vineyards and they learn about wine. And they shared with us, my husband and I, that the most exquisite wines come from grapes that come either through drought or flooding. So something remarkable is unleashed in the grapes that go through the hard times. And
Wow.
so I think, again, such a picture that God does not waste our pain, and even the difficulties that we are facing here and now in the very day-to-day is forming in us something really exceptional as we stay the course and as we trust him.
That's powerful. And one of the last things that I want you to touch on is true freedom, because I think that everybody needs to understand true freedom.
I think sometimes, especially with the youth, freedom to the youth would be, no rules. I can do whatever. There's no curfews. And honestly, true freedom is being able to make the choices and have our own agency to follow God. And it's like that is honestly true freedom. I think that when we understand that when God lays out his path because he is good, that we can either go kicking and screaming.
That's right. That's right.
Or we can lean into this place. And for me, I tend to be performance oriented. I like to be in control. I want things to go. I'm firstborn. I'm a rule follower. I mean, for all those reasons, I like it to just work. And what I'm learning about life is messy. And, even for me as a vocational Christian minister of the gospel, doesn't exclude me from the trials like, going through a cancer diagnosis. And, you would think that a missionary wouldn't have to go through hard times, but no, that God's greater purposes are still being established. And so for me, what I needed to get my mind around is that his purposes are being accomplished. He did not cause my cancer or
Right.
any other difficulty, but that his purposes are being fulfilled, and my still being here for whatever reason is bringing more glory to him than for me to go home right now.
If
So,
you can quickly tell us what having breast cancer did for your faith.
ooh, we need another 4 hours for that. But really quickly, I think it was soul
Give us the
altering.
short version.
The short version, Carla. It was soul altering to become a gracious receiver. So for my faith, I love being the strong one and help other people and all that. But for me to learn to be a gracious receiver, to be in the place where I couldn't produce or do, I had to be and I had to receive.
Did your trust level for God, Vivian, go like way up in that, okay, God, I'm depending on you. I am expecting you to heal me.
Ooh, it was probably up and down, to be honest. There were times when I felt like I had really good perspective, and other times I'm like, I really want to see my kids get their driver's license and graduate and maybe get married. I mean, this is not a wrong desire,
No.
but I needed to really lean in and trust that God, if you are saying that it's better for me to, go home to you now, I have to trust that your purposes for my kids are still going to be accomplished even through something that doesn't make sense to me. So it really was, there was a real genuine wrestling that took place, and at the same time, an experience of God's tenderness and his care. For me, like the whole area of prayer opened up in an incredible way for me, where I used to kind of think, prayer is how you start and end, any meetings, or pray for a meal and I would get honestly frustrated at a small group where the women would be like, oh, pray for my neighbor, they broke their ankle, I'd be like, what's really going on in your life, and honestly, in the middle of chemo, where it was just the worst of the worst times, and I'm crying into my pillow and I'm asking God, would you please wake everybody to pray for me? Because I don't think I can make it. And I literally just threw those prayers into the air, not knowing what would come of that. And then the following weeks, Carlette, I just kept getting texts and emails and people coming up to me in the grocery store saying, I usually am a really solid, like sound sleeper, but for whatever reason, I got woken up in the middle of the night to pray for you, and I prayed for you. And so that was soul altering, that God is at work, and he is always, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It's like he is always at work, and he's using all different people in all different ways. Oh, it's just so
Goosebumps
good.
to me
So
too.
good.
Vivian, we've got to do this again. The book, Open Hands, Willing Heart, Discover the Joy of Saying Yes to God. How do people connect with you and your resources and get the book?
Oh, yes. So the book can be found anywhere beginning July 9th. And there's also an audiobook that goes with it. So I'm really excited about that. For people who pre-order now, there'll be a form that you can actually download the first couple chapters of the audiobook for free.
Perfect.
So that's pretty exciting. I'm at Viv Mabuni, Mabuni, at Viv Mabuni, at Instagram, on Twitter. I love connecting with people, and I have a new podcast that I'm hoping to launch for Asian American women called Someday Is Now, and that's coming up next month.
We'll visit again.
Yes.
Visit again, so you'll have an opportunity to talk about that. Hey, Vivian Mabuni has been our guest this morning. Everybody, stay on point. We're back right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. This is my final point, on point, today. As I was reading Vivian's book, Open Hands, Willing Heart, Discover the Joy of Saying Yes to God, it took me and my family back to a year and a half ago when a decision had to be made as to whether or not we would take two small toddlers into our home. In the natural, that made no sense at all. Not only were these children 1 and 2 at the time, they had challenges that they needed a lot of medical attention. In fact, the baby, we literally picked him up from the hospital. And so it would have been so easy to say, no, I can't do that. It doesn't work with our lifestyle. We get up at 4:15 in the morning and we're gone literally from sun up to sundown. Where, God, are we going to have time to put 2 small children into our lives? It doesn't make sense. But our family felt that saying yes wasn't just saying yes to these babies. It was saying yes to God. And I was telling Vivian before we started the show about our yes. And I'm not bragging on our yes. I'm just saying that our yes to God's will for our lives has to be more open and more broad. And understanding that when God asks us to do a thing, He will make provision for that thing that He asks you to do. And you don't have to do it. I don't have to do it. See, our whole goal is, okay, what's the plan? How do we make this happen? How can this work? And it's our desire to control it. And when we feel out of control, we feel like, oh, that doesn't work for me because I want to be in control. I need to know what is happening at every second of every step of the journey. And that's just not how God works. It means that we have to throw our heart over the bar, have faith that God is not asking us to do something that He intends for us to fail by doing. And that's really the bottom line. And as I sit here saying it today, each minute I'm saying, okay, God, you've given us, this is just one thing. You've given us these children and you are going to provide the way that is fruitful for them and that works for us. And God said, you know, when you have taken care of the least of thee, and I go back to that scripture, children and old people, He said, I count it as though you are taking care of me. So I am not going to let you fall. I am going to make those crooked ways straight. And this book is just about an open posture, just like this. I surrender, God. I trust that your plan for me is far greater, far more monumental than my pea brain could ever even imagine. And that's why I love this book. That's been my final point, on point today. Stay with us. We're back to wrap right after this.